ahead and record this because then I can share it. So thank you all. I'm going to share my screen. And I really appreciate your willingness to be facilitators. And I think everybody who's on this call has facilitated before. So that's wonderful. It's not like we're starting from scratch. But I did want to share, first of all, just kind of the reasons, I think, for doing the training or having a facilitators group. So one is just because we keep hearing feedback about the importance of the breakout rooms, that people really do appreciate that opportunity to converse with each other. And I think that is what sets our town hall meetings apart from a lot of other kind of presentations and workshops and what are called town halls, is that we really have that opportunity for the community to come together and have a conversation. Another reason for doing the training then is just to have consistency, so that if I come to a town hall and I participate, in a breakout room, I know that the next time I come, I'm going to have that same kind of experience. What we want to do is create a safe environment. We want to reduce tension and anxiety, and the best way to do that is to help people know what to expect. So consistency and common expectations all lead to that. It's also a way we can invite more people to engage more deeply. So as I said, I think the folks that are on the call now have been part of either the mental illness task force or the race and racism task force, the MITF or the RTF. But as people come to the town halls, we can invite them, if they're interested in becoming more involved, to become a facilitator. So it's one way to get people more engaged in the work. And then just having that ready pool so that every time we have a town hall, we can say who is available in this group, instead of kind of casting a net and seeing what happens, just having a prepared pool of talent. So what I want to talk about tonight is preparing for the town hall, some issues about technology, how to facilitate the breakout room, how to report out, and just some tips and hints. And I recognize that for a lot of you, this is probably the stuff that you eat and breathe and sleep already. So feel free to add to what I have to say. But again, just kind of trying to set that common table for everybody. And I'll feel free to ask me questions as we go. Raise your hand or say something in the chat box if I don't see you. Whoops. So first of all, preparing for the town hall. Make sure you register beforehand. So there will always be the registration link. You want to register before the meeting, and then you'll always get an email prior to the town hall with the questions for the small group. So if you're facilitating the small group, you don't need to come up with the questions that are being asked. Those are all decided ahead of time. And the idea is that everybody would be talking about the same questions. But I only have a very short window that I can broadcast those questions. And once you're in the breakout rooms, you can't see the chat anymore. So there's no way for me to keep those in front of you. So what you'll want to do is when you get that email, either print it out or write down those questions so that you can refer to them later and you don't need to just use your memory. And then make sure that you have the latest version of Zoom installed on your computer. It seems like they do an update, I think, every time we have a town hall, just about. So, so Mondays seem to be big days for updates. So it's helpful to just make sure that you have that so that you don't get stalled and delayed being able to get on the group. And then in terms of technology, please make sure that you do have a good internet connection. So if you have a way to plug into your router, plug into your router. If you don't and you have to do wireless, sit close to your router if that's at all possible. And if you just can't, if you're in a place or a space where your internet connection is just bad, then probably facilitating is not the right role for that particular time. Appreciate the offer, but if you're not able to be in a consistent conversation, that's gonna not be helpful for your group participants. Ask you to avoid earbuds because they tend to, unless you've really tested them beforehand and you've not had any issues, it seems that earbuds are the biggest thing that create barriers with people being heard. Um, People use them and they can hear, but then they try talking and nobody can hear them. So it's best to just try to avoid them. And then as you're talking to the folks in your group, make sure you're speaking directly toward your computer. Avoid kind of moving your head around. Now, one of the reasons that I went ahead and got a headset is I move my head around a lot. And so that allows me to still have my microphone with me no matter where I'm looking. But if you're leading a group and you don't have a microphone in front of you, it's in your computer. So make sure you're directing your comments toward your computer and know that if you get up to grab something, people can no longer hear you. Any questions about kind of preparing or technology before I go on? Okay. All right. Next, facilitating the breakout room. So, whoops, gee whiz, antsy on my screen here. So again, the questions will be pre-assigned, but be aware that they might be cut. So we might have 4 or 5 possible questions, and we might ask 2 or 3 of those questions. Um, so they will be pre-assigned, but you need to pay attention to what's actually being asked because we might combine a question or cut out a question, and that all has to do with timing. It refers to this next one too. Sizes may vary. So what happens is the small group conversation. A lot of it is kind of flying by the seat of my pants, um, to use a technical term. Um, what we're doing is time management, basically. Uh, it depends on how long the presenters took. Did they stick to their time frame? Did they go over? Maybe they were short. How long was Q&A? We'll try to, if it's going on and on, we will limit it, but maybe it actually limited itself and it was shorter than we thought. So we look at how much time we have at the end of the speakers and the Q&A, how long we have, and how many participants and how many groups. So there's a lot of different variables. My if I had my preference, my go-to number is 1 minute per person per question. But if we have groups, if we have fewer facilitators or a huge group and we have 10 people in a group, we're not going to give 10 minutes to a single question. It's too much time. Um, and if we have, 4 people in the group, we're probably not going to go 4 minutes. We'd probably go to 5 or 6. So it's a function. All of those things kind of play into a mathematical algorithm, if you will. So just listen because I'll always say this is how long you have, and I will always post it in that broadcast. Here's the question. Here's how much time you have. And then I always have somebody wonderful like Angela or Maddie being my timekeeper. So they're paying attention to how much time I've given you. And you'll be able to, and I'll broadcast the next question. 6 minutes is up. Here's the next question. Here's how much time you have. Now, you also get a bonus minute at the end because once we ask all the questions we're going to, uh, and I close the rooms, it'll say you have 60 seconds before the breakouts end. So that last minute, a lot of times people talk right up until it ends. You don't have to, but you have kind of that bonus overlap, which can help to wrap things up. I mentioned the broadcast box here because that is where, I'll type in the questions and how much time you have and shoot it out. But I know that that only stays up a limited time. Oh, and I already talked about closing the breakout rooms and the bonus minute. So what do you do in the breakout room? First, you want to just introduce yourself to the people. Let them know that you will be the facilitator, maybe your name and where you're from. Do not use up a lot of time on your introduction because really I'm here to facilitate. I'm Barbara, I'm from the Momentum Center, and let's talk about this first question. You want to encourage everyone to speak, but be mindful of the time limits. So the biggest part I think of this of facilitating is kind of that time management and giving everybody an opportunity. So there might be a need to say to somebody, this is really helpful, I'm glad you're sharing, but we need to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak. You might answer first just to set an example that, we do have a question, but we have a limited time, so this isn't the time for somebody to give, the 10-minute background of their whole life existence, right? You want to just kind of ask for a direct question, a direct answer to the question. And if you feel that that's coming on, you need to kind of interrupt and guide that. This is important. This is really interesting, but we only have a couple of minutes left, and we need to make sure we hear from everybody. You can call on people to do a really short answer and then go back to somebody who, you know, um, maybe, so has anybody ever had this experience? Just yes or no. And then the person that is yes, well, would you mind sharing more of that? Um, I recommend that you do one of two things for getting everybody to speak. Either you call on everybody. If you're in a group and you just say, okay, who wants to go first? Many times nobody wants to go first. And so you're just have dead time waiting. Instead of doing that, I would tell people, so as a facilitator, I'm just going to ask in the order on my screen if you would answer this. Please feel free to pass if you're not comfortable answering, or if you want us to come back to you. So intentionally invite everyone to speak, but allow them to pass. Um, Another tool you can use is mutual invitation, which is where one person answers and then invites the next person that they want to hear from until everybody has had a chance to answer the question. I like that a lot in real life and virtual. The only question would be is how long it would take you to explain that to the group. If it takes too long to explain it, don't use it. If you've got a group that's yeah, maybe you've worked with before a lot of these people, then that can be a really good tool. Again, the questions are pre-assigned. Time management, as I said, is really key. Keeping things on track. So if people go off on a tangent, thank you. This is really interesting. But the question we were asked is, and so bring it back to that question. And then the only thing to really insist on is that the ground rules be followed. And so I put those up again, and you don't need to go over the ground rules again, but just be aware of them. So if you do have somebody that, for instance, wants to debate, that you can say, well, I can tell you feel passionately about this, but one of our ground rules is that we just allow people to share what they're thinking and feeling, and we don't comment on that. We just allow that space, or we're not here to decide what's right or wrong, but just to let everybody express their own opinion. And then if they still won't follow those ground rules, then they have a choice. You can ask them whether they're able to and willing to follow the ground rules, or if they'd rather not be part of the conversation. So that really is, the most important piece for creating safety. Um, if you're having trouble with somebody and you can't and you need help with that, you have two options. There's a little button that says ask for help, and then that shoots up on my screen, and I can go in and join, and I can remove people if I need to. Uh, or you can leave the meeting and come talk to me and then go back into the meeting. So if you have questions or concerns or anything, those are two ways you can ask for help.
Um,
Go ahead.
where is the ask for help button? Because I don't see it.
You have to be in a breakout room.
Oh, okay. Well, that explains that. Thank you.
Yes. Yep. Um, and then the other thing, and I'll come back a little to being a non-anxious presence, but the other thing is make sure you're taking notes at this point. So you can take notes in whatever form you want. You can type them, or you can handwrite them. You can do shorthand, whatever you want, but take notes. And because you're gonna give those to the committee to look at. And I'll talk about that a little more. I wanted to talk about being a non-anxious presence. So that is the key to facilitating, is not becoming like emotionally invested in everything, right? Staying a little bit, staying more objective. Change and uncertainty creates anxiety. Talking about issues that are emotional creates anxiety. Inviting people to come into a conversation that talks about race and racism, just by its nature, creates anxiety. Um, and anxiety creates fear, and fear makes us stop thinking. And we just go right into reptilian brain and we stop thinking. And that we revert to old patterns, usually the patterns we've learned in our family of origin of how we deal with conflict, fight or flight or distance or enmesh. And I'll talk about some of those. Um, and when we do that, then we start trying to kind of fix people, and fixing people only increases anxiety and makes change more difficult. So, the way we solve problems is by reducing the anxiety and being a non anxious presence ourselves. So, some anxious responses, if you're in a conversation and you feel your anxiety rising, one thing can be over functioning, where you decide that you need to like solve the problem instead of just allowing the space for the problem to be expressed. Um, Kind of trying to fix things for people, make things better, make them go away, or triangulating, putting yourself in between. Maybe there's even a conflict between two people, and you try to be the peacekeeper. Um, that's not your role. Your role again is just to let people express themselves, and to take those notes in a safe, express themselves in a safe and respectful way. Trying to get everybody to agree. Everybody doesn't need to agree at this point, or minimizing, just decide, or ignoring the concerns. What are non-anxious responses are more things like, I'm not worried when I hear about problems because problems are a normal way of knowing we're growing and evolving. So you might hear something that's really disturbing, but thank goodness you're hearing it, because that means there's growth going on, that we're kind of bringing to light those things that are happening, that people are carrying with them, and to remain in that non-anxious, not taking it personal place, where it's just a fact, and the fact that it's being shared means that growth is happening, that we are evolving, that we can do problem solving. But our job isn't to fix people or get rid of the problem, it's to create a safe place for those problems to be explored. If we had lots more time, then we could go into how to help give people those tools. But that's why we're doing a whole year series, because we can come back to this stuff and we can hopefully unearth where these problems and concerns are, bring in the people who work in those areas that address those needs, and find those solutions as we go. Finding the solution within your small group in your 5 minutes to talk about the question is less likely to happen. And if you start focusing on that, you'll reduce the amount of time that people have to share. And so you really want to encourage the sharing. Be a be a non-anxious, non-worrying presence, so that at the end you can report out. So I'll pause here before report out. What are your questions, thoughts about any of the actually being in the group, in the facilitating small group time?
I think it was good, Barbara, to get the guidance on kind of just giving people the space to talk. I'm more used to like an academic setting where the debate
Mm,
is, the core function. So that was good to go over. Thank you.
sure.
I'd like more time to look at your slides. Are you going to make this available to us?
Yeah, and you know what? They're a little bit more content heavy than I usually make them, because I thought I'll do that. I'll just give them to everybody, and then you've got those two with basically everything I'm saying.
Well, I can go over it just beforehand and make sure that, it's very clear.
Yeah, good reminders.
Yeah.
Yeah, Maddie.
Yeah, so hopefully we never have a situation like this. But I was wondering what would happen if, let's say, someone is describing a situation they're in, but it sounds like they're still being emotionally or physically abused in some way, or could be potentially in a dangerous situation. How would we handle that?
So in that case, I would ask them for their contact information so that we can talk to them afterward.
Okay.
Would she do that in front of everybody, or would she do that personally in the chat?
Well, the other thing is in the chat, you've got the, you've got the name, and we can track the name back too. What you want to do is so one of the things you don't want to do is use the small group to become a counseling session, right? You're not doing group therapy. You don't want it to be a group therapy session. And you don't want people who are vulnerable to start over disclosing in a way that now they feel like they've over disclosed and now they're not safe, and now they're not going to come back because people know things that they, it's a delicate balance. You want to provide that opportunity for people to share to the degree that is warranted in a small group, right? So these are people that we haven't established a long-term trusting relationship with us. So I wouldn't expect them to like over disclose everything. So if they are disclosing, issues of concern, we want to follow up with that. But we want to do that offline, not in the middle of a group session.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, let me go, and I'll ask again at the end, but so reporting out. We used to, when we started, we did a question and then we reported out, and then we did a question and we reported out, and we hoped that the reporting out would help like everybody inform the conversation for the next question. But in reality, in a virtual setting, that just takes too much time. So we just don't do it anymore. To go out and come back and then everybody report, it's way too time consuming. So we've gone to just a single round. Normally at the end, either at the very end or before the very last question, because the very last question is usually the same question. What can we do to create more inclusivity as individuals and in our community? But just one round of checking out. And what we want the facilitators to do in that round is like a 10-second soundbite. We don't want a 1-minute overview of each question, right? At this point, we usually have, 10 or 12 facilitators. So if everybody talked for a minute, that chews up 12 minutes, and that's quite a bit of time. And we're usually, this is at the end, and we've tried to maximize our time in our groups. So what we're asking is at the end, the facilitators give that one aha or the theme that was consistent throughout. The thing that struck you, the one suggestion that you think was really great. All of the notes should have captured the greater discussion. So it isn't that all the other stuff is not important, but this is kind of just the 10-second biggie. And if somebody's already said what you've said, maybe there's a different one you can offer. You don't have to. You can say, man, that was the same thing that came out of our conversation. But if we can have diversity in those comments, that would be great. So think in terms of your sound bite. What's the one thing you want to make sure you share before we're done? And then those notes, if you've been typing them, just copy and paste them into the chat box before you're done. And then we've got them. If you wrote them, then you can type them, you can take a photo of them, you can scan them, but get them to me within the next 12 hours, because then we'll have them when we have the debriefing meeting the next day. Easiest thing, if you're typing, just stick it in the chat box and it's over and done with. If we don't get it that way, we'll start sending emails reminding you, please get them in. And hopefully we'll have them all by the time we debrief, and we can start going through and looking for those ideas and themes and suggestions and ideas. And of course, as you're able as a facilitator to be part of the debrief meeting, that adds a richness too, because you can speak to the context. Oops. And now I'm not advancing at all. Here we go. And then I just had some tips and tricks here to share, tips and hints. One is just think about using inclusive language and watch out for small acts of exclusion. And thank you, Monica, for the book that gave me that language, because I like it. And I think here, for instance, you might want to use gender neutral pronouns unless somebody has shared what their pronoun is. Think about trying to watch for your assumptions and your biases, and try to use inclusive language as much as possible. Recognize that your role is to listen more than speak. It doesn't mean that you don't have something to contribute, but again, you're trying to facilitate everybody else's conversation. And so this wouldn't be the time for you to kind of take it on. And that would be kind of that over-functioning role too. So make sure that you're inviting everybody, giving everyone that option to talk or to pass. But I would have them say that they would pass. I wouldn't just decide if somebody didn't say anything yet, they don't want to talk. Ask clarifying questions when appropriate. Consider, I think I mentioned this, that you might do a really brief check-in and then go back to individuals for that deeper conversation. And again, recognizing the importance of safety, which is these three things at the bottom. Managing your anxiety and their anxiety. Manage everyone's anxiety by sticking to the program. Stick with, if this is the question that you've been asked to talk about, then talk about that question. Let people know that whatever we've said is going to happen, that's what's going to happen. Stick to the plan. Be that non-anxious presence yourself. Another way to think of that is when people want you to feel, that's when you think, right? Conversely, when people want you to think, that's when you feel. Stay in that kind of observing role. And extend grace to yourself and to others, because if someone's going to say something, or you're going to say something and you're not going to mean it, and it's going to be and you're going to be embarrassed, and you just you apologize, you let someone else apologize, you extend grace, and you go on. And I think that's so then questions. We talked about coming prepared, checking your technology, facilitating the groups, reporting out, and some tips and hints. So questions at this point.
I have my hand raised. I don't know if you can see
Hi,
me.
Emily. I see you now. I just expanded my screen.
Okay, thanks. So I guess, do you have any tips for like last time I was in a break room and it was just like 3 other people, and it was kind of like pulling teeth to get answers. And so it was really hard to like facilitate conversation, because it was like almost we had too much time, and it was kind of like awkward silences.
Yeah, so this is one of those perpetual problems where again, you assign everybody, and then not everybody goes to the room. And so then sometimes there's still, like their screen name is still up. So I don't know if they've just gone out to feed the dog or what, but but the screen name's up, but they're not listening and they're not joining the group. And I try to do some balancing, but I know this last time there was that group with 3, and unfortunately there were some groups it was not distributed well, because there was like 7 people in some groups and your group with 3, and that should have been redistributed. But at that point, it's hard to, go in and say, hey, can I bring one of you out of that group? if any of you are ever in a group where there's too few, just leave it and say, hey, can you reassign us? Because there are times when I've gone into a smaller group and said, hey, wondering if I can reassign you. And people have said, no, we're really enjoying this conversation. So sometimes that works out and people really love that intimacy. So never hesitate, if it feels too small or too big. Come out and say, hey, can you do some reassigning? And I would jump into doing that. No problem. I do try to manage that, and usually it works out better. It was just last time was there was a lot of weird issues. I got kicked out to basic for some reason. So that's why we didn't have our polling questions, and but that should have all been resolved now. Carrie.
I was just thinking that might be a good time for to ask how they found out about the town hall, and how if you come to a spot where you need some extra filler time, how they found out about town hall and what interested them in it and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Carrie.
May I share one tip?
Yes.
When I find that there's a lull, sometimes I say more about that. And then they can go a little bit deeper. And actually, you probably already do that, but that's a tip I learned relatively recently.
Yes, very good. Other just tips to share with each other. Another thing I really like about putting together this facilitators group is we can do another 3 or 4 town halls and then have a facilitators meeting just to say what's going well and what have you learned works, and just kind of sharing that knowledge with each other.
Well, I have been a facilitator before, but when I was in a meeting, Monica was facilitating, and shout out to her, because one thing she did that I noticed was she thanked us for our answers, or when we volunteered to say something. And I think that's part of creating a safe space for everyone. I really appreciated that.
Yes, thank you. That's I should actually add that to the slides. Thanking people for their responses. Absolutely. Any other questions?
I just think this format doesn't really lend itself to small group dynamics well. So you haven't developed any kind of trust or relationship, and it can be on the surface if you don't do that kind of managing well. And I love that thanking people after they share. That helps to develop trust.
Yep. Yeah, and there is no question that virtual is not the ideal way to do any of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there've been some really good suggestions.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. And I'm glad I taped this too and took some notes. So I'm going to add your suggestions to the slides, all of them. And then let me ask you, so was this helpful? Would be one question.
Yeah.
All right. What would make it more helpful? Monica.
I think the one other thing I've been sort of thinking about in my mind is, because this next session might have people who are getting on the call just because they think that they might not like what they hear, which is different than our typical audience. And Brian, I know you mentioned in our planning meeting that Calvin Terrell was open to and did meet with some of those, if we say just naysayers about his visit to Grand Haven High School. Because I didn't attend that, I'm just wondering, I know when I've worked with people before, if they have, if they're anxious about going into a session, to kind of pre-wire what your, in terms of your brain wiring, pre-wire what your like safe response might be to keep you a non-anxious person. And, whether it's just like that, I'm not thinking up a good one right now, but something like, if it wasn't, too outrageous, thank you for sharing, and kind of like having those ground rules, like right in front of us and thinking, I'm not thinking of a really good one. I wish I was, but thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I don't know, I feel like must be right now, I must want one of those one-liners, because either I'm too tired today, because usually I'm pretty good at this kind of thing. But what might be, maybe we could as a group brainstorm, since I'm clearly not modeling it. Or if Barbara, you have some ideas, like what are those, if you have somebody, because we know this might happen. And some of us facilitate and some of us might be newer to it or rusty, apparently. So what might be some good one-liners that we're pre-wiring ourselves to say, so that if it becomes unpleasant or even potentially in one of the groups, maybe even a little hostile, that's a pretty strong word, but like, what is that one-liner that we already know that we're ready to say? I know I read this book about the power of habit, and Starbucks, not Star Wars, Starbucks literally trains in their customer service people of all these different scenarios. So when that irate customer comes in, they're ready, they've already wired. And so I'm not suggesting we need to go through something like that, but since I'm not thinking up any good ones, MJ, Brian, somebody help me out here. What are some good one-liners that, thank you for sharing your thoughts, let's hear from someone else, but a better version of that?
That's a fine version.
Great idea, Monica. We should definitely do that. And I'm going to have some written down beside me. Like two that I'm thinking of immediately is to paraphrase somebody and say, so a concern that you have is, or a belief that you hold is, so that they feel heard. And sometimes when you paraphrase a person, they will stop talking. They're like, yep, you heard me.
That's good. Yeah. My go-to is always something along the lines of, well, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that, or, and just try to move things along. Do that with my kids, actually.
I like the idea of maybe expressing that or acknowledging that that was their opinion, but not necessarily a fact, because it was their opinion. But so thank you for sharing your opinion. With that, just some type of way of acknowledging, that was your particular opinion, and you have a right to that, and we appreciate that you shared that. But just because it's your opinion doesn't mean that it's actually a fact.
That's really good.
And then I don't know whether, what our timeline is, or is there some type of opportunity after we're done to have those people feel like they're given feedback that could be addressed or shared at some other point? I think having some type of opportunity like that, even if it's not something that we do right then, can help deflate some tension too.
Yeah, and what we've talked about is the possibility. We don't want to extend the town hall, because again, we want the consistency and we want the expectations and but we have talked about saying, okay, now the town hall is done. Our presenters are available if people want to have, a conversation, that will stay online and kind of do a second conversation, but it'll be separate from the town hall.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Barbara, I was also thinking, everyone who shared their ideas, thank you. I love that. And the word perspective came to mind too, that opinion can sometimes be like, well, that's your opinion. And it still is kind of that me versus you. But as long as they're not being rude or disrespectful, as long as they're not breaking the ground rules, then to thank them for their perspective feels just that little bit gentler too.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I like that. I like
Yeah.
that.
I like that too.
Yeah.
I was,
oh.
okay.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Keep going. I was just thinking, I really like those two. Thank you for sharing your perspective. And remember, this is a safe place for all of us to share, something
Mhm.
like that. I might add.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And anytime, I mean, use those ground rules to be kind of the fillers or the buffers. Yeah, Monica.
I love that, Carrie, especially because in the back of my mind, I keep thinking that I started thinking about this when we were doing the planning. If I'm a facilitator and it's that one group, right? I'm not imagining there's going to be a lot of people on the call, but if it's that one group and someone is being rude or hostile, my most important job is to, yes, not be that anxious person and to stand up for people of color or anyone in that group that might feel not safe. And so, well, my default is to be really polite to whomever. I want to make sure that I'm not leaving someone hanging, that person just insulted or that person just, was very rude to. So I love that, Carrie, because it's a way to say thank them for their perspective or their opinion or sharing their thoughts. And it's also a way to make sure that I'm letting anyone in the room, in the group, who might have been really offended by whatever just happened feel honored and recognized too. I think that I appreciate that, Carrie. I feel like I was looking for that other half. So thank you.
Monica, what you said is just really powerful to me. And I hadn't thought about that, even though I care about it. And so I'm just going to push a little bit and say, is that enough? I mean, are we protecting the people who are offended by just saying thank you for your perspective? And is there more we can do besides punch them in the gut? Oop, did I say that?
That came out of your mouth.
So I think,
Sorry.
again, one of the things, because we're all, kind of those healer kind of people, is that the temptation is to try to make it all better. And I don't think this is the format that we have an opportunity to make it all better. What we have an opportunity to do is to listen to the stories, to listen to the feelings, to listen to the suggestions, and then to work on those suggestions. Are there other workshops? Is there training? Is there, how do we're not going to, we can't solve it. And we're being really clear right up front, that this is a place where we're not, we're as long as people stay respectful, all opinions are you can express yourself. It's a shame-free zone. This is where we're trying to unearth that stuff. And I think that's where, so it's not a therapy session. And what we can do is, again, set the table to say, if you don't abide by the ground rules, you have to go. And then we kick them out. But as long as people are following the ground rules, the action is in it's so good we heard this. And even if holy cow, it's a genuine thank you. If somebody's expressing something that's totally different than the way we see things, what an opportunity to hear that. I mean, we need to know what these thoughts and thought patterns and behaviors, because we can't do anything about it if we don't know. So if we can really kind of unearth that, and I know like last month when we heard that there were people who had committed kind of acts of ethnic intimidation. I mean, if we can actually create a place where people can share that, then we have so much more to work with in terms of, you know, how do we, what do we do as our next step? So the community conversation isn't about therapy or solving it or fixing it. It's about bringing it into the light, because it's there whether we see it or not. So how do we expose it, the stuff that's dark and deep and yucky, get it into the light so that we can all find a different way to handle that, to deal with it, to help people see, unpack, and decide if they're going to continue carrying stuff with them. I mean, so again,
And you're saying the norms are the way, when we uphold the norms, that's how we stand up for the people that may have been insulted.
Mm-hmm.
Should we as
Got it.
facilitators give any room for, you know, if there's a situation where, you know, I think obviously if there's a clear direct insult, you know, I think we should immediately shut that down and, you know, say that that's not within the rules of the conversation. But, you know, if somebody in some other sense feels aggrieved by what somebody has said, you know, without letting it just spiral out of control into this therapy session or, you know, unproductive discussion, should we give somebody a chance to respond to something that maybe has been upsetting for them, and then, you know, kind of let them say their piece and redirect the conversation? Or should we as the facilitator try and take that upon ourselves? Because I'm thinking if I were in that situation, I'd like to be able to say something to address that if somebody said something that was personally difficult for me to hear, or
Yeah,
just
so
insulting to me or something, I should say.
yeah, and I think again we can provide a space for people to share their response. Again, remembering that one of the ground rules is that we all have triggers, and they can be touched unintentionally. I mean, somebody might be really aggrieved and offended by something that someone didn't even mean to offend them by, right? And if that happens, that we can name it without blaming somebody for it. So I think it's, you know, if somebody, hey, I want to respond to that, then please share with us how you're feeling. You know, we're not gonna debate, but we think it's important that everyone be able to share how they're feeling, and so we can provide that opportunity. But we don't want to get into, like like, a debate.
Yeah.
Or triangulating, you know, where now I have to somehow make you feel better about what somebody said.
You know, talking about the different type of situations that could possibly arise reminds me of facilitating a restorative circle type situation where, but in this particular situation, you don't have the time to work through it. So, you know, I think that's the greater concern is, you know, giving that opportunity to go back and forth. I mean, we do those sessions and knowing that some people could end up not feeling really comfortable or getting their feelings hurt through the process. But the whole process is to make sure that everyone's heard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that you will necessarily agree when we're done with the process, but that everyone had a chance to be heard and to give their side, and hopefully hearing their perspective, perception of how something had occurred.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple views in it, but typically though, when you're done, you've had that time to work through that process. And with this, you can get that 30-second thing starting to tick down and sweep you into a room with several hundred people sitting there that was not a part of the situation that you were in. And so I think that's a bigger concern. So I hoping to facilitate going back and forth could maybe cause a larger problem in the end. I don't know what the answer is to it, but.
And I do think, and so that is another reason to stick to the questions, right? Like, this is the question, and we really want to hear everyone's perspective about this question, your ideas about this question. The other thing is, that there could be opportunities to invite people to become involved in the task force. And there also could be opportunities to say, that's a really interesting perspective, and that might be helpful down the road, in a future conversation. And you can take note of who said what, because that might be helpful for us down the road in a platform where we have more time, where we're not virtual. I mean, eventually we could actually be able to meet in person again.
I'm very intrigued by this conversation because I've kind of set I get expectations kind of low. I figure if somebody doesn't throw pornographic or, racial slurs on our screen, we're just 100% ahead of the game. I can't imagine what someone is going to say that is going to be so offensive to someone else. Worse than that everything else I feel like we can deal with.
I love that perspective, Mary. Really.
Maybe I've set my standards too low here. But I really think I think it's good to go into these situations prepared for difficult conversations. But I think we've just heard some really great suggestions about, thank you for your perspective, and let's go on and see how others feel about this.
Yeah. Yep. Great. Anything? Oh, Carrie, yes.
I just wanted to, I think at our last meeting, we talked about making sure people knew that it wasn't something that would be viral, their small group, or it wasn't something that they had to worry about. So
the other thing I'm adding to my introduction as we talk is that I will make sure people know that the small groups are not recorded. Because I talk about the fact that, we're recording and we're going to get this to everybody. I want to make sure that I note that the small groups are not recorded. You don't need to worry about, that kind of, disclosure. Yeah, that was a really good suggestion that I hadn't even thought of that. And then it's like, yeah, I could see people thinking, well, I don't want what I say to be part of this, right? Mm-hmm. So that confidentiality too. All right. Well, if you don't have other questions, then my last question is, who's available on December 28th for racism in the educational system? I see Monica, Mary Jane, Emily. Is everybody on the line available? Is anyone not available?
I'm 90% sure I'll have stable internet, but I will be on the road. Traveling again, but I'm relatively positive I'll have internet for that.
Okay. And we can still count on you for security.
Yes, myself and Cecil, who will be on the road, we will both be available.
Okay, fantastic. And I know Jane has been recording. Gina, your screen is still up. Are you available to facilitate on the 28th?
Yeah, I'm available to facilitate.
Okay, great. Then I will send all of you those final reminders and questions and the like. If other questions come up, let me know. Other suggestions and feedback, I think, having kind of this dedicated facilitators group again, I think just really helps the whole process. And I love the idea of, let's just gather this team together again in a couple of months and say, how's it going? Any concerns, any suggestions and tips for the rest?
And Barbara, could you put this on the website, on the Momentum website, that the training is available? And if anyone who goes on the website can see that.
Yes, and I did put it in our last newsletter,
Yeah.
but I can do that, and then I'll also add it to the slides for the actual town hall.
Yeah. Because this is very helpful.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. All right. Well, thank you all so much for taking yet another Monday night. Just block out all your Monday nights.
Really?
I'll trade this one for a couple of the board meetings that I've been a part of on Monday nights any day.
There you go. There you go. All
City
right.
Council, Planning Commission, town halls, school board meetings. We've got it all in our group, right?
That's right.
All the
That's
things.
right.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you guys again. Namaste. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good night.